Is it crazy to say that Steve Nash changed the way teams were built in the NBA?
It was this little good-looking David Beckham little guy.
This guy's going to be the greatest Canadian basketball player that ever lived.
The Canadian has not only become the most disrespected multiple MVP winner in league's history, but it's often not done justice to how his style of play partially led to the transition of modern basketball. And trust me, we get it. Steve's time in the league coincided with Kobe Bryant, a fan favorite and GOAT of a whole generation. Nash was a legendary shooting guard that neither the awards nor the press respected properly. Partly for the benefit of Nash, whose revolutionary offensive impact was discovering a new side of basketball. But this fact should not change the conception that Steve is, pound for pound, one of the best players in NBA history. The road to the elite was especially difficult for the point guard. Steve was born in South Africa, where he lived for only 2 years before moving to Canada. Both his parents were athletes, as were his younger brother Martin, and that fundamental aspect developed in Nash an intense passion for the sport. After starting to play basketball at the tender age of 12, the kid fell in love with the orange ball. It didn't take him long to excel in a Canadian training system that really didn't offer much competition. Nash averaged 21.3 points, 9.1 rebounds, and 11.2 assists per game, bordering on a triple-double average in his senior season with Mount Douglas Secondary School, where he played with his brother Martin. However, the chances of going pro or even making it to Division I in the neighboring country seemed more of a dream than a real possibility. After seeing him, I was nervous as hell, just hoping that no one else would see him. Dick Davey, head coach at Santa Clara University, was the only one to set eyes on this exotic prospect from Canada. And those were his words after seeing him play for the first time. Dick realized that the kid was not only an efficient scorer with a spectacular long-range shooting stroke, but also he realized that Nash was capable of running an entire offense. The bad news? His defense was questionable. That was the main factor that caused Nash, after accepting Davey's offer, to suffer a late explosion in the NCAA. An explosion that came from his sophomore season onward and allowed him to end up being considered one of the best prospects of his generation. His position in the mock drafts of every scouting agency in the country put him on the edge of the lottery picks of one of the most loaded classes in NBA history. Allen Iverson, Kobe Bryant, Ray Allen, Marcus Camby, Stephon Marbury, an overwhelming number of top-quality prospects were Steve's competition. Steve ended up being picked 15th in the 1996 draft by the Phoenix Suns, a franchise that didn't appreciate the Canadians' talent until years later. Steve exploded as a star with the Dallas Mavericks, where he was selected for the All-Star team twice, but his true identity and best version of himself came during his second stint with the Suns. Nash was beginning to show signs of being a player ahead of his time, of whom there were not many comparisons in the history of the league. A cutting-edge point guard who elevated the concept of efficiency to the highest level. And the reason was none other than Mike D'Antoni. The head coach has one of the most revolutionary minds in basketball history. The aesthetics of his offense based on pace, pick and roll, and spacing, which contrasted in an era when the game was slower than ever. And it's a fact that's not too hard to prove. The following graph shows the difference in scoring pace between the average NBA team and Steve Nash's Phoenix Suns during the point guard's tenure in Arizona. However, it is curious to see how D'Antoni's own Suns played at a pace of just 92.6 in the previous season, which was the coach's first season at the helm. Steve Nash was truly the piece that allowed Mike to fulfill his tactical dream in the best basketball league on the planet. Their offensive system was known as 7 seconds or less, in which Phoenix would try to take a shot in the first few seconds of every possession. The reason for this? The defense didn't expect it. They weren't set for it. NBA teams of the 2000s were accustomed to half-court offense and traditionally defensive basketball. Nash's brilliance allowed them to find numerous opportunities in transition on a roster in which most players, including their center, Amari Stoudemire, was very mobile. In Nash's first 5 seasons back with the Suns, the team ranked in the top 5 in transition points with no exceptions. A team that, in a similar fashion to the Denver Nuggets, decided to swim against the tide with respect to the NBA trends of play. But the Suns also needed a good half-court offense to be competitive, and Nash's presence provided both in Mike's schemes. Steve had many qualities that made him stand out from the rest of the point guards in the league, but the combination of his speed and his ability to play the pick and roll made him unstoppable. The Suns were among the first teams to try to insert the stretch four concept into their approach. Examples like Sean Marion or Boris Diaw faithfully represented a way of playing that allowed them to get much more space in the paint to let the unstoppable two-man game between Stott and Nash shine. Help side defense? Don't worry, Steve will find the open man. A system that many defenses had no answer for and that allowed Phoenix to reach 2 consecutive conference finals. Nash was the architect of one of the most incredible technical masterworks the NBA had ever seen. D'Antoni's system, which gave him free reign, allowed him to lead the league in assists as many as 5 times, averaging 10.9 assists per game in the 8 seasons he played in his second stint with the Suns. The Canadian was, quite simply, the best playmaker in the league. But in addition to being a player who completely conditioned a team's offense and was able to elevate the performance of his teammates, Nash was an extremely efficient scorer. In fact, he is the leader of one of the most exclusive clubs in the history of the NBA, the 50-40-90 Club. Basically, this cast of players is made up of those who have been able to shoot over 50% from the field, 40% from three-point range, and 90% from the free throw line over the course of a regular season. Believe it or not, this club is even more exclusive than the one made up of players who have been able to win multiple MVPs. Here is the complete list of players who have made it into this club for at least one season: Larry Bird, Mark Price, Reggie Miller, Kevin Durant, Stephen Curry, Malcolm Brogdon, and Kyrie Irving. Oh yeah, and Steve Nash 4 times! Of the 13 individual seasons in all of league history that have qualified to enter the 50-40-90 Club, 30% are Steve Nash's seasons. What's even more incredible is that the point guard nearly earned another 2 seasons in the club. In the 2012-2013 season, Nash came within 0.3 in field goal percentage, and in the 2006-2007 season, he came within 0.1 in free throw percentage. And what's even more incredible, in those 8 years with the Suns, his accumulated averages qualified for the club. Unreal! It's no exaggeration to say that Nash is the most efficient player in league history. Not only is he the 12th best three-point percentage shooter in league history at 43%, he is also ranked 30th in career three-point shot attempts, a level of accuracy and an enormous shooting volume that has only been surpassed by Steph Curry. But the Canadian was not only an absolute sharpshooter. His percentage in the paint was above the NBA average for virtually his entire career, while his mid-range shooting was one of the most efficient in history. In short, Steve became one of a handful of players who could be considered an offensive juggernaut, a player who was on the verge of being the key piece of a one-man offense and whose style of play was studied in great detail by the generations to come. When something works, you have to copy it, and those Phoenix Suns, man, they were very good. The point guard position has always been an organizational focus, a fact that is changing in the modern NBA with the arrival of combo guards like Damian Lillard, Stephen Curry, Jamal Murray, or Devin Booker. But that, until the last few seasons, had remained intrinsic to the evolution of basketball. And Nash, as we've said, was elite as a playmaker. However, his conception of the game was very different from that of other players who shared his role. Steve's eyes allowed him to understand the game in another way. His conception of space was different from other point guards, who were merely executing plays of an old-school coach. Nash not only observed the current positioning of every player on the court, but he was able to see how defenses were going to adjust over the next few seconds, partly because of a concept of gravity that wasn't as common in the 2000s. His exceptionally consistent long-range shooting forced players to be glued to him from virtually 30 feet away from the hoop, and he was fully aware of that. Steve deformed the space with his movement and sensed the position of every player on the court. His perimeter vision allowed him to find advantages from anywhere on the court, and his natural talent allowed him to make the best decision possible. The only thing he needed in return was freedom. And when he got that freedom, he became the NBA MVP on 2 consecutive occasions, a milestone that only 13 of the more than 5,000 players who have played in the league have managed to achieve. And that represents the level of dominance a player could reach without being a natural scorer. 2 awards that have been the last occasions in which a pure point guard has been able to lift the reputed trophy. But his influence was not stopped there. Steve was able to prove that fast tempo had a place in competitive basketball. The NBA has been plunged into a progressive pace increase that seems to have reached its ceiling. The more attractive style of play has attracted the attention of a global market that increasingly enjoys American basketball. And Nash has been one of the causes. That Phoenix Suns system is probably the only offensive system in the 2000s that has aged according to NBA trends. In a dark period in which defensive basketball was dominant, D'Antoni managed to show which was the way to go, and his futuristic system would not have had the chance to shine without a point guard who was able to understand what the future of basketball would look like.